Hello, everyone. Welcome back to week three of the DAOs Project podcast. Ethan and I are happy to be here. It's been a couple weeks. I had vacation. It was just super busy last week. I'm happy to be back talking about DAOs. Ethan, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm ready. Let's talk.
All right. So this week we are talking about impact measurement is our high level pattern. Cursive funding is our second pattern. And then the badge imager is our form. So some interesting things to talk about today. I'm going to go ahead and just flip right over to here, the ICDevs donation page. Again, this is all done under a 501c3 charity. If you would like to donate for us to continue to do this and to put the time into editing these videos and putting them out, we would love for you to do that. You can do it a number of different ways, including minting ICDV tokens, which you can go to our donations page here at icdevs.org/donations.html and log in with plug, and it'll walk you through how to mint tokens. Currently, we're still in the 1000x bonus stage. So that'll get cut in half once we hit 1 million ICDV. Let's talk about our DAOs. Of course, at daos.icdevs.org, you can go and you can walk through this publication that we put together. You can walk through all of our pattern languages, our form languages, the generative language. And each week we talk about two patterns and a form language. So our first form is impact measurement. And this is one of our high level forms. Impact measurement is important, especially when you're talking about a DAO that does grants or that does bounties, because you need to know that the resources you are putting into the work that your DAO is doing, you have to know that it is productive. And the only way to do that is eventually to measure it and to see if it's having the effect you want. I like to come down to our little graph here and zoom in on that. It supports resource optimization, which is our top level pattern. So this is a second level pattern. And it is supported by feedback loops, immutable records, quantitative analysis, quantitative assessment, and annual reports. I think if you look especially at initiatives like Gitcoin, they're really focused on impact measurement right now. Ethan, I'll throw it over to you. As you were looking at this pattern, did you have any thoughts, misgivings, confusion? Let's just talk about it a little bit and see what your feelings are on impact measurement.
Yeah, I'm going through this section. It reminded me of being in some corporate meeting and talking about her KPIs for the year, which I know always gets everyone excited. This impact measurement, I think, is one of the things that is it's so subjective and complex and something that I don't think I can handle. Every company that I've been with has really struggled with things like KPIs. And when you go away from something that's purely focused on profit and just does that number go up, I think it might make things a lot harder. If you're producing open source code, how do you really measure the impact on a piece of code? Is it how often it's being used, just how important it is to someone? So it's a super subjective thing that is very hard to tackle. I don't want to ever have to deal with.
Yeah, it's tough. I think that people who are good at impact measurement are good at it. They're able to see the big picture. And I know as a developer and a technician, most of the time, especially when I'm in the weeds working on it, it's hard to step back and see that big picture. So there are some people who are just good at this. It speaks to something that I think has come out of this work, which is that if you want to have a DAO with three people, it's going to be really hard to have a really successful DAO because there are a lot of these roles and you need a wide range of people. You need someone who's good at impact measurement, right? Um, and then we'll find another pattern later called Goodhart's law that's elsewhere. which basically is a law that says as soon as you start to measure something, stops being, stops being a good thing to measure everything by. Because if you measure things too directly, everybody starts organizing towards that measurement, and you're not actually achieving your goals. You're just achieving the measurement. And so for me, that's what makes this hard. What I like about setting things up in a pattern language is that when we have something big like this, that's really hard to get our hands around and that maybe we don't understand, it's broken up into patterns that support this pattern. Maybe we should spend a little time looking at those supporting patterns because those may be just a little bit easier to reason about and actually take action on. It's just saying, hey, how do I measure impact? That's a lot harder question than, hey, well, let's look at them real quick, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. I
first, what
wouldn't
is
even know
feedback loop?
where to start because are you having
Right,
someone do the impact measurement? Is it just built into the DAO? How are you even going
right,
about that?
right. So for instance, feedback loops and integrating community feedback. That gets a lot easier to reason about, right? Okay, yeah. So we need to survey the community on a regular basis and see if they like what we're doing. I don't know how many DAOs do that, but I think that that's important, right? And it's almost like if you never came up with a KPI, but you did this and you just asked the question, even if it was free form, I feel like being disciplined about continuing to ask the question at a regular interval will lead to organic feedback. Now, maybe it's feedback that favors the loud people in the room, but it's better than nothing, right?
Mm.
Um, Immutable records support impact measurement. Uh, and I would argue that immutable records, of course, we're in blockchain space, right? So immutable records support a lot of different patterns. And I love that in the blockchain space, using immutable records helps secure and give you a touch point when you do have good feedback. You can go back and point to the actual records. Nobody can go manipulate the records. They're on the blockchain. You have evidence of the order and the timestamp of when certain things occurred. And so the more you put on the blockchain, the more evidence you have to support the impact. Quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis. This isn't a huge split. I think it's an important split, but we're basically just taking impact measurement and splitting it into two pieces here. One is what can we count and can we make the line go up? Are our DAO members happy on a scale from 1 to 10? Can we make that line go up? Our participation in DAO meetings is X number of people out of X number of people. Can we make that ratio go up? That's quantitative analysis, just counting the numbers. And that is especially susceptible to that Goodhart's law. Qualitative analysis is probably more important, but more nebulous. How do you feel when you have to go vote for this DAO? How do you feel? Are you happy that you have to click on approve? Okay, older, approve. Okay, older, approve. Okay, older. If you've been on the internet, that's what I'm talking about. And sometimes you feel good when you're going through that and you're like, yeah. This is going to be awesome. This is going to be awesome. And then sometimes it's just a trudge that you go through to pick up pennies off the sidewalk for your maturity. I think that's important. And as we go through the weeks, we'll talk about that. So we will break down qualitative assessment. We will break down quantitative assessment and talk more about that. And then the last one here for this is annual reports. And I don't know. I think Definity has probably done this for the NNS. They probably have done some kind of annual report. I know Kyle Langham does a lot of analysis, and I think he at least put out some reports. I don't know if they were specifically annual reports, but there were some sort of systematic numbers that were put out regularly. I don't know if any of the other DAOs have really done that. It's a pattern that I put on here. first of all, it's a pattern that we pull out of, it's an easy one to pull out of the ether because that's what companies do. If you have shareholders, you owe them some kind of annual report. And if you're a public company, you do quarterly reports. So there's certainly something to it because people do it, companies do it. And putting that in place and knowing that you're going to have to do it also sort of probably puts some pressure on the people running the DAO because they know that it's coming, right? Hey, it's almost time for the annual report. And that stuff that we promised in the last annual report hasn't been done yet. When are we going to start that? So,
Yeah, I think it's also good to just an exercise in a lot of this stuff is what's in the moment right now versus something like a quarterly or annual report. You really like looking back at previous data and reflecting on changes and whatnot.
yeah. And the nice thing about looking at things at an annual basis, as opposed to every day in the morning when you wake up and make your to-do list, is it can make you feel good, right? Those little steps, a lot of times they feel very frustrating and you hit these walls all the time and things get delayed. But if you look back over the course of a year, you can get a lot done. And so I think that's important as well. And so as we put our DAOs together, I think we're going to have to bite the bullet, and you're going to have someone who enjoys doing this kind of impact measurement and is willing to take on basically creating an advertisement for your DAO that you get to put out every year and say, look what we've done. Um, and so maybe Definity has some patterns they've done. I know they really do this pretty well for maybe seasonally on their public developer calls. They do a pretty good job of that, of going over where they are on the roadmap and what they've accomplished. So if you're a technology DAO and you're building tech, that may be your annual report. Here's our roadmap. Here's where we were, and here's where we got to. It can be simple. It doesn't have to be a thick Walmart's annual report. It just needs to be something that shows your progress. I think the moral of the story here is just do it. You got to do impact measurement.
So
Uh,
question around the quantitative side. And what was that law or rule that you mentioned? Uh,
Good
where you're
heart. In
measuring
fact,
good heart.
if we click on quantitative here, there's probably a link to Goodhart's law. So we're looking forward here a little bit, but Goodhart's law says when a metric is used as a target, it can no longer be used as an effective measure. So I don't know how you avoid that. And we'll talk about it more. We talk about Goodhart's law, but there's a lot of stuff and research around making sure as part of your annual or seasonal process, making sure that you evolve what you're measuring, right? So this year you're
Mhm.
measuring X. Next year you need to measure X plus Y. You should be gaining resolution as you measure these things and finding out more of what's important. I think that's a takeaway.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if not a simple problem. Should you be using multiple metrics that kind of maybe you're balancing each other out or expanding to just beyond quantitative and go more qualitative or what would be a good process? But doesn't seem like there's a perfect solution.
I don't think there's a perfect solution, but a lot of people are talking about it. And in fact, this is the post. So there's this post, public goods funding must be evolutionary, that Kevin Owaki did back in May. That's really interesting. So funny XKCD here. When a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good metric. Sounds bad. Sounds bad. Let's offer a bonus to anyone who identifies a metric that has become a target. Anyway, he goes through, he talks about sort of Gitcoin's approach to this, uh, how they've had to handle it. He has some stuff talking about what to do about it right here. He talks about measure M and then measure M plus one, M plus two, so on and so forth. So I think this is a really good place. I'll put this in the show notes, and people who are interested in how to combat Goodhart's law can can do that. If people have some interesting ideas and want to revert them back to us, maybe we can create a forum over on the post on the Dfinity forum, or you can actually just talk about it more here on this forum on Gitcoin. And when we get to Good Hart's Law, which it'll be in a few weeks, we can maybe revisit it and see if the community doesn't have some solutions. Right. Next is iterative funding. This supports feedback loop and grants. And the idea of iterative funding is that in a DAO ecosystem where capital allocation and project funding are critical, a mechanism is needed to ensure efficient use of resources, prevent capital drainage, and motivate perpetual project progress. So I think this is important, especially in grant DAOs or any DAO that has grants or deploys resources. Funding everything up front is a risk. Not funding enough upfront limits your pool of people that are available to come do the work. I know I know we're both dads and have families that we support, and it's tough in an industry where things are done a couple months at a time, and then you're evaluated, and then maybe you get another grant. That's a very tough environment to support your family in. It leads to stress. There's probably a lot of people out there who are in that situation that aren't seeking grants and are going and taking more secure revenue. And so this iterative funding problem pattern is important, but it has to be balanced, I think. And it has to be, I think, barbelled in some way. Like it has to be both iterative and that you're evaluating if it should still go forward, but also secure enough that you can set out. And if you have general success, it's not going to go away on a whim. If that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, as a grantee from Dfinity, it feels like it makes a lot of sense. Just DAOs in general, like if you ignore things, fraud or whatnot, and there's stress with maybe not having all the money up front and dealing with that, but just the process along the way of just kind of checking in. And at least for myself, and for Dfinity, it's helpful to just have those points of, hey, we need to touch base, get everything organized and presenting. It kind of reminds me of a waterfall versus an agile approach a little bit of just, you have these check-ins every sprint or milestone, and things can just come up too. If just something doesn't make sense anymore, it goes a different direction, there is some sort of problem, someone has to drop out, things have to be reevaluated. It can help in those situations. But I think it's very much a balancing act of a middle ground between upfront versus paying at the end. And it can be case by case.
I think that if you look at the blockchain space in general, people get a little cuckoo when they get too much money. And so you've seen some ecosystems throw giant, and a little bit of jealousy here, right? Some ecosystems have thrown massive amounts of money out, developers, and it's just sort of disappeared into the, I guess it's unfair because Ethereum doesn't actually do this, but some blockchains do. And that's as frustrating to see as the other side of the coin as well. I know that in some of the things I've been involved in the moment, if they would just give us a big enough chunk of money to go do this, then we could really attract the people we need and we could secure it. We could put our heads down for 6 months or a year and build what needs to be built. And then it moves, then everything moves. Right? So if you look at NFTs, when 2021 and 2022, early 2022, the importance of NFTs in the blockchain space was blowing up. And of course, let's throw as much money at it. Let's throw as much money at it as we can. But if you do that and then it shifts and now everything's in AI and you've already pre-allocated your capital, you don't have the capital. It's gone. Someone else has it. So I think it would be really interesting to look at kind of a balance between, especially when you have a strong community, and this is a totally self-serving proposal here, but a balance between iterative funding of subjects, but consistent funding of objects, being people. So when you have good developers and you have good community members who are dedicated, having us, I don't know if this would be called like a fellowship or what, but you're going to work in our DAO. We're hiring you like 3-year contract, whatever, or at will. I don't know. It depends. This may be jurisdictionally based, but if I know that don't have to worry about what I'm going to be doing at Christmas time, or can I plan my family summer vacation 6 months ahead of time? If I'm not in that situation, I'm able to focus much more. Now, I may have to give up what I get to work on. The DAO may be in charge of telling me, hey, I know we were funding your NFT thing, but the VCs aren't funding that anymore and no money's coming in on NFTs. So we need to pivot over here. We need you to go work on this AI stuff from now on. Right. I think that's maybe an interesting pattern to look at. And it's maybe a little suboptimal because it's not guaranteed that the DeFi guy his skills are going to translate to
Right.
pay for play gaming or whatever the hot thing is today. But it would smooth that curve a little bit. I think it would allow more quality people to join into the ecosystem and know that they can stick around for a long time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Definitely complications with it, but finding that I feel like in a situation of a DAO that's a little more flat hierarchy and decentralized versus some CEO or VC in some more centralized setting, that really having to balance that risk out instead of going all in on one thing immediately, on just kind of over time being able to allocate capital to different parts and different people.
Yeah. So a little bit of suggestions here as far as how to actually implement iterative funding, setting clear milestones, using an escrow system. This is an important one, especially when you're dealing in the startup space. If you're going to do an iterative grant, knowing that there's funds there if you're successful is important. So having that escrow system and knowing the funds are there can be really important. Regularly reviewing and auditing that you're working on the right thing, and then doing feedback and all of that great stuff. So, and later on, we'll talk about seasons and feedback integration teams that support iterative funding. I'll speak to it just briefly here about seasons. I think there's some things that you want to fund. They don't need to be funded constantly. There needs to be a seasonal funding of them. So I guess it depends on your DAO. So I'm trying to think of a good example here. But if you look at things like the conference circuit, right? So you don't want to constantly be having conferences. You'll burn everybody out. It's like your community may try to do one a year, like one big conference a year. So that's funded iteratively, but not constantly. So you're going to allocate those funds ahead of time for that particular season when that's going to happen. And all your resources are going to ramp up and execute and then ramp down. So I think that's an interesting thing to look at as well. Okay. So those are our patterns. The form that we're going to touch on today that was identified as this idea of a badge mentor. And I think this is certainly not anything complicated or fancy, but I think it's a really interesting use case for blockchain. Because when you work at a company and you get attaboys and a pat on the back, or maybe, hey, you get paid a bonus, it's not something that you get to take with you. And I think that the mixture of the immutable nature of blockchain and this idea of proactively minting and recognizing people in real time and in a way that sort of sticks is something that our DAOs can do that other entities can't. And so, a simple example here, you participate on a working group for a certain amount of time and you contribute, and the DAO can propose to mint you a DAO participant NFT, right? And then you get that, and it's a soul bound thing that you get to take with you forever. So if you end up 10 years later in another DAO and people are like, well, what are your credentials? Why should we put you on the working group instead of this other person on the working group? You say, well, look, I have evidence here of that I was awarded these things by this other DAO, and it's obvious evidence that I contributed. Once we have the infrastructure in place, I think things like these should become just super, super easy to do. But I don't want to burn people out on them, but you could use for voting on a especially important proposal or something, right? I voted badge. And then of course you can incentivize people with benefits based off of what they have in their portfolio of badges. I guess another word for these, I guess, would always be attestations as well. And so there's a
Mhm.
whole project around attestations. There's a really interesting internet computer project that is using Chain Fusion stuff to import attestations from all over Web3 and bring them and sort of make them accessible from the internet computer. I think that might be a really interesting starting point for someone who wants to go and implement this badge mentor platform for their DAO. That project may be worth going and looking at.
Yeah, I totally agree that this is such a simple concept, but besides just in these DAOs, I think this is the thing that many people in the industry are waiting for and know that this is coming. It's essentially reputation and in different segments. But if I'm going on and I don't know in the decentralized environment, I'm not necessarily going to know everyone. And if I'm able to just see, has this person contributed a bunch and where, or if I'm on the forum, and I just see a random person commenting, I don't know if they're just some random poster who doesn't really have a lot of reputation, or this is some OG person who contributes a lot, which makes a lot of difference. I just feel like it's 2024 and we've had the internet for such a long time, but we don't have this concept of knowing basic ideas about anyone and where they are and what they're doing.
Yeah.
Essentially, the equivalent of the job market is like, okay, well, you're going to have to give up some references and they're going to call up those references and kind of see what you've done. And as an employee for a company, as a software developer, working on proprietary software and whatnot, it's like how I can't really show off what I've done. There has to be some other levels of, hey, is this a valid DAO? Do we trust this? Once you have, like you're saying, that base infrastructure in place, this can be a super powerful yet super easy tool to implement pretty much anywhere.
So it's Christopher on the forum built this Ethereum attestation, basically combiner that takes things like Gitcoin passports, went to this conference, is 25 years old, completed the training, and then is able to sort of bring all of that into a composite attestation. And either I don't know if that's held on the IC or if it's written. I think maybe it's all pulled together from the IC and then written back to the EAS application on whatever EVM it's running on. But this would be maybe an interesting thing to use to kind of provide that service. So I know he made some progress on this, and I'll need to go check and follow up and see where he's at. All right. So any other comments on impacts, measurements, iterative funding, or badge ventures before we wrap up for with our big question? And I came up with one. So
Oh, good. I don't think so. I think I just really want some badges and being able to easily show them off. Even if we get them right now, it's like, oh yeah. pull up your wallet, find some NFT or whatever. But it's all about infrastructure. We need that infrastructure.
Well, you get some, right? I mean, you go to your profile, you get all these, yeah, you get badges. I got all kinds of badges, right? Some of these speak to my poor choices over the last 4 years, but visited for 100 consecutive days. I can't believe I did that. I need to take a weekend. Um, and so these are nice, but you don't really, they're about your activity on the site, not about who you are so much. And
Mm.
so I feel like often I see this happen a lot on the forum, especially a lot of developers toil in the dark for months and months and months, and they are so excited to show the world what they have.
Yeah.
And they go and post it and nobody knows who they are. And it's either ignored. This lady who came and posted this thing may like have been the CFO at Coinbase or something. Like nobody knows. We have no clue. Or they may have contributed to 150 GitHub open source projects. Those kinds of things are really interesting and can lend a lot of credibility, and being able to amplify those in the right environment, whether that's the dev forum or whatever ends up eventually replacing the dev forum that hopefully runs on the internet computer, would be great if it was able to sort of do those kinds of things. And with AI now, it'd be really interesting because you'd think an AI would be able to say, okay, what attestations does this person have and what kind of posts are they making? And which would be the most important attestations and badges that this person has that would give a reader more confidence in the post? I think that would be interesting to look at also. Yeah. Okay, here's the big question, and it may be too big of a question. We talked about qualitative and quantitative measures. If you had to pick one quantitative and one qualitative measure to measure on the NNS to attempt to track the success of the NNS, what would it be? What would those be? You only get one of each. You can think about it for a minute and I can edit our silence out.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, so you mean, so specifically NNS and not just internet computer? Cause I know I feel like those can conflate a little bit.
Well, the
So
NNS
the
is the
NNS
DAO
is
that
a
runs
DAO.
the NNS is a DAO that runs the internet computer. Now, we can argue about whether or not it's a successful DAO, an efficient DAO. We can argue about those things all day long. But the reality is that it's been up. It's a DAO that has been up for over 3 years. It, I think, has the most activity of any DAO in the world. Now, whether or not that activity is productive activity where we're voting on exchange rates 1,000 times a day, like back in the early days, you can argue that, but it's unabashedly been around and existed and done what it said it was going to do to a certain extent on a number of different vectors and a number of different axes. So the question is, you can only measure one thing quantitatively and only one thing qualitatively to track to see if it's getting, if the NNS is becoming a better DAO or a worse DAO. And maybe better or worse is arbitrary,
Right.
but we can debate
Yeah.
that. But I think to me, I think a better DAO for the NNS. So I'll set the parameters here for what I think is good for the NNS. We want more specialists applying their craft and guiding the network in the areas that they're specialists in. We want liquid democracy to work in the sense that people should follow a wide array of experts in different areas. So I should not be following the same expert in replica upgrades as I am for node allocation. Those should be almost completely separate Venn diagrams, right? I think To me, that would make a good DAO. And then obviously more participants, more TVL. I'm naming quantitative things you can measure here. TVL in neurons, diversity of neurons. Um, how many do we have? What's the average neuron size, right? What's the addition of new neurons?
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously
I
the
would
price
say
of the
like,
price, the price of ICP.
yeah. Yeah. Cause I'm just going through all of them. It's like, okay, I can game it this way. It's like, okay, amount of proposals that are going through. That can be a good thing, but also could be a bad thing, or just putting proposals through for the sake of proposals. But yeah, I like the idea of having a lot of neurons, medium-sized neurons, right? So instead of having, when it comes to liquid democracy, a bunch of divinity, just being a giant neuron and then you got a bunch of small ones, of it being a little more balanced out, but not too small to where they're not organized enough or it's too much work for individual neurons to do something. So maybe a lot of the medium-sized neurons push is what is a medium-sized neuron. I guess that's a whole different rabbit hole. And then a qualitative one, and that's tough in that because it's kind of hard to measure directly on the internet because you could have, I would say, a lot of good discussions and back and forth, not like that isn't really captured on the internet. That's happening outside. So it's really hard to see. There's a bunch of proposals going through. Is it just one person doing it, or is this like a community collaboration and well thought out standards and things like that? But yeah, that's tough. And I feel like if there were a good answer of just one of each, then DAOs would be an easy thing, and
Yeah, of course.
we wouldn't be talking about it like this.
It's a contrived example. So something
Yeah.
that pops into my head is, and this may be too annoying, right? But when you do go vote, what if the first thing you had to do before you could vote was like a vibe check, right? We've had this whole sort of controversy around periodic confirmation of neurons. What if instead of that, you don't get to vote unless you tell us your vibe once a week or something like that, right? Or some sort of qualitative thing. Now, of course, people can lie, right? But if there's a reason to lie, you don't want to give people a reason to lie, and you want to encourage people to be truthful. So I don't know how to best do that, but I think it would be interesting. This person has shown up at a dashboard of their own volition to go vote on these like weird things, node providers and motion proposals and treasury. How do you feel if you're authorizing this SNS to withdraw $1 million? Some of which is yours that you put in. How do you feel? How do you feel right now? And is that important? Right. I think that would kind of be interesting. And as we talk more about DAOs and sort of how they intersect real life, I think there are going to be sort of these things where you want to force the DAO to intersect real life in a way that's meaningful and gets you good data about who's in your DAO and how they're participating. And because the only thing that we have right now to tie people to keep coming back to that dashboard is is the perception that showing up and voting gets them money, right?
Yeah.
So I think we want more. I think that it's just inherently in the internet, there's this mission to build a decentralized infrastructure for a new compute paradigm, right? Like that's a mission based thing. And are we doing that? Do we feel like we're doing that? So I don't know. We'll see. I don't envision the internet taking that to heart anytime soon and implementing a vibe check on voting, but it would certainly be an interesting metric to try to track.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember, there used to be once in a while through the internet and the forums a temperature check. And it always seemed like it got a lot of backlash on just what's the point of a motion proposal? Why are you doing this? And there always seemed to be weird negativity around it. So we'll see if a vibe check would be any different.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because a temperature check was usually about something. The thing that nobody likes is to go take their time and vote on something that's ultimately meaningless, right? And so I think that was the backlash on the temperature checks. Is that first of all, they were put forward as motion proposals. If this passes, the NNS has to do that, but there's actually nothing that makes the NNS have to do that in a motion proposal. So I think that was why they got so much pushback because it's like, look, dude, you're coming and making me vote on these 10 things. Now I have 11 and this isn't going to do anything. Right. So I think a vibe check is different in that it's almost the opposite of Goodhart's law, where if you measure something, it becomes worthless at measuring. There's maybe a reciprocal of that that says, if you tell me you're measuring to find out what's good, then maybe that is good. Right. Okay. I feel better about being asked, how do you feel about interacting with the internet computer today than having to come and vote on something that says, should we lower the inflation rate? And if you vote yes or no, it's not going to matter. Right. So I don't know. It's something interesting to think about. Not actually proposing that we block anybody's maturity. If for any reason, this is purely speculative. If anybody says,
Don't touch people's
Aus-
percentages.
Austin wants to block my maturity unless I vibe check, I'm not proposing that. This is a thought experiment so that we can create better DAOs in the future. The NNS is baked and we're not going to change your maturity for vibe checks unless somebody else does it first and it's a really, really good idea and we come back to it and we feel like we have to. So, all right, cool. Well, thanks everybody. We'll see what we do the next show, maybe next week. And if we really, really would love for you guys to leave comments, subscribe, give us feedback. ICDevs wants to do more stuff with YouTube, but we need subscribers. I think we have to get 500 subscribers before they let us monetize or do anything interesting with trying to raise money for the charity through YouTube. So even if you watch this and you're not going to follow us forever, if you like what we're doing, that's why everybody always asks you to hit that button, is because they're trying to get to that point where they can actually monetize. So that would be sweet. And I guess the last thing I should mention is we have Gitcoin Grants 21 going on for ICDevs right now. If you want to go contribute to that, that would be great. Our campaign is not going well. We're about halfway through and we have 4 or 5 donations for $30. So part of that is my miserable marketing. And part of it is that it's a pain in the ass to bridge funds over to Arbitrum from Ethereum from a bunch of ICP folks who may not be holding a whole bunch of Ether in the first place. So I understand if for those of you who have gone and done it, I appreciate it incredibly. What we're proposing is trying to build a chain fusion router for the grant DAOs that are trying to create a distributed, up-to-date registry for grants across a wide ecosystem. We think the internet computer is the ideal place to do that. And we want to fund a bounty to build that router on Chain Fusion tech that integrates with the Allo protocol and the other protocols across the EVM space, so that when somebody publishes a grant to one registry, it gets automatically picked up and broadcast to the other registries, which will increase everybody's exposure. So if you think that's a good idea and you want to help fund it, ICDevs is raising money over on Gitcoin Grants season 21. Thanks a lot. Anything else, Ethan?
I'd say, yeah, comment down below if you're interested in an audio version, because we're looking into seeing if that would be a good option to go down with an RSS feed. But no, it's fun as always.
All right, great. Talk to you soon, Ethan. Bye, everybody.